Hello everybody and welcome to an American release film in terms of the Corruptor, released in 1999, directed by James Foley. This is basically an American attempt to do a Hong Kong style kind of action thriller, suspense film with Chow Yun-fat as our main leading character and a very young Mark Wahlberg, which is kind of fresh off from doing some very early projects, I believe, within Boogie Nights and within Theo, another film the director would do as well. Now, The Corruptor has been one of those films I wanted to check out for quite some time now. It's been on the shelf, and I think it was the right time to check it out. You know, there's a couple of those action thrillers that I've been really wanting to dive into, and there's been many other kind of other areas that I want to check out within Japanese cinema, of course, a few more of the kind of category threes, and some of the Shaw Brothers films. There are so many within the space in terms of Asian cinema, and there's definitely been quite a few of the American side Japanese and Hong Kong based kind of content that are definitely out there, and The Corruptor has been one of them for sure. And having Chow Yun-fat and Mark Wahlberg as a kind of team up movie, that's an interesting kind of concept. And I've seen a few others of Chow Yun-fat's kind of American outing. You know, he obviously got big doing the Better Tomorrow movies. I think the second one definitely would have solidified that kind of legendary iconic status within his role within that character, and obviously doing a couple of scenes within setting New York, setting America, and he definitely was hoping to kind of break into kind of American cinema through those kind of movies, those kind of big John Woo movies. And unfortunately never really kind of took off for him within Bulletproof Monk being pretty awful, if I'm being absolutely honest. And then I know he did Replacement Killers, which you're having around to seeing. I heard that's kind of hit and miss, depending if you watch the extended cut or not. And he's done a few other movies within that space. And I think this was his second appearance after doing Replacement Killers. So this was a bit more of a grounded, more of a thriller-based kind of, you know, with action moments throughout the film in terms of The Corruptor, backed up by Warner Brothers, joined by a pretty established director this time, which we've gone on to do some of those 50 Shades movies, which is kind of hilarious. And much like other Hong Kong stars transitioning into the US, we're in Jackie Chan, Jet Li, many other kind of, you know, big stars, you know, Donnie Yen, of course. I was curious to see what the results would be and to see if there's something was underrated, worth checking out, whether this one needed a bit more of attention in terms of its kind of, you know, its outing, because this is definitely not a recognizable film or as well received film compared to some of the other big players like Rush Hour, of course. The basic storyline for The Corruptor is basically, as already hinted on the shelf, is a prior Training Day kind of based template film, essentially. This was released in 1999, this one was released in 2001, and Training Day would be the definitive version of this type of storyline, this idea of a rookie cop, being Mark Wahlberg in this case, and you've got an established kind of, you know, beat cop in terms of Chow Yun-fat, you know, part of this Hong Kong division, basically tackling down kind of, you know, local gangs, and Mark Wahlberg's character has been assigned to this division. And the film is very deliberately going for this kind of cultural clash between American and Hong Kong kind of style, kind of values and attitude, and just kind of, you know, the traditions of those kind of cultural clashes. And obviously looking at that division, you're going to see some very questionable kind of language and stereotypes, and very much pointing out a lot of those kind of stereotypes throughout most of that first act of the film, which is kind of a bit annoying and kind of hilarious at the same time, where kind of characters kind of pointing out the most obvious things. And you've got Chow Yun-fat chewing up the scenery, which is surprisingly does work in this film compared to some of the other films he has done, which is interesting, but I'll get into that in a moment. You've got temptation, you've got this idea of, you know, we can make you into something bigger than you are, and something, the idea that Chow Yun-fat took a deal with a long time ago as well. So you've got this idea of The Corruptor is basically both of them, and this idea of both of them being corrupt, basically taking individual kind of bribes and taking deals with the local organized kind of Hong Kong kind of crime gangs, essentially, and kind of looking the other way or making the busts, helping them out, making you look good, giving you the promotions, giving you that status, and giving you some of those kind of perks alongside it in terms of women and money, and taking care of some of that debt. And both of them are being swayed by the corruption that's happening within New York. And it's an interesting kind of back and forth when the film decides to really kind of kick into those kind of ideas and those themes, where both characters realize they're both corrupted and both on the take, essentially, and they both have to start making some real tough choices in the film, which leads into the kind of the third act. So the differences compared to Training Day and The Corruptor is, you know, there is some sense of value in a character that wants to do right and standing up against the odds against Denzel Washington, which King Kong got shit on me, which is hilarious, versus the Mark Wahlberg case where he's in a bad situation, but does take the bribe, does take the deal, does look the other way, helps his dad out, And basically, as the film goes along, both of them realize they're on the take and working for the same person, but start to question each other's motivation. Can they trust each other? You've got the internal affairs, kind of also they're doing their investigation. You've got kind of pressures from different ends on this film in terms of the Corruptor. And both of them have to start making choices whether to help each other, go against each other, and it all leads into some pretty interesting kind of action moments and some pretty intense moments as well throughout both their kind of individual careers and their characters, essentially. And this is a very slow, sluggish kind of film. I think the first hour of this film is a chore to get through, to the point where I was almost thinking, am I going to start fast forwarding this film, because that first hour is not very user friendly. It is a very hard film to kind of get through. It doesn't have the right kind of pacing. It just kind of isn't particularly that interesting. I think the problem with the film ultimately, in terms of the Corruptor and why it isn't as rememberable, why it isn't as, as a status kind of big film in terms of everyone's kind of foremind, is because it's just very forgettable. The story is so bare bones, it's so paper thin. You're trying to find anything, and the most you're going to get is within the characters' individual kind of performances, and that can take you only so far within a film which is meant to be about, people being corrupted, about organized crime and things of the kind of local, local Chinatown, and it doesn't start to really pick itself up or start to get interesting or have that kind of tension within the post-hour marker. This is a 2-hour movie, way too long for its runtime. It should have been an hour and a half film. Should have been a lot more, faster. It does have some like kind of Bad Boys kind of energy, that very kind of Bad Boys 1, maybe going into 2 a little bit in terms of its action moments. You can definitely tell action isn't the director's kind of forte. It isn't something that he's particularly strong with, but it is nice to have those moments sprinkled out the film, because it definitely breaks up some of that kind of monotony and kind of slow pace of the story, having some kind of action-based moments and some car chase kind of scenes and some gun shootouts. You got Chow Yun-fat in your film. How can you not have a cool shootout? And he definitely does his kind of Hong Kong style mannerisms with flipping over and definitely taking some information from kind of John Woo. Absolutely. In terms of the performances, I'll go into these now. Chow Yun-fat, I think, is actually pretty good in this film. He definitely has the over-the-top kind of nature of his kind of personality and his comedy that he does within Hong Kong movies. I don't think it works as well as it could have done. I think there definitely is that kind of cultural clash when he's doing like kind of really weird things and pointing at people and putting his leg up on the desk and just really kind of awkward kind of mannerisms, but it's just kind of his comedy style that he does so well within Hong Kong cinema, and it doesn't quite work as well as it could do in this film, but that does define who the character is, and he does have the grounded kind of back and forth kind of performance, which I really love seeing from Chow Yun-fat. And I think there's a good combination of that. When he wants to be serious, he's very serious. When he's over the top and silly, he definitely does go into that and lean into that. But when he does go into the action moments, he definitely delivers for sure as well in terms of his kind of star appearance. And I think this definitely is a good collaboration film for him. It's a shame the film didn't really kind of take off and didn't allow him to land other bigger roles later on within kind of American cinema. His partner in crime is Mark Wahlberg, very fresh off the gate Mark Wahlberg from Boogie Nights as mentioned, and doing Fear from the director as well. And I think he's decent in the film, considering he was meant to be a singer prior to his kind of career to being an actor. I think he does a good job. He's Mark Wahlberg. He plays the role pretty well. I think he plays vulnerable. I think he plays sincere and scared, but also it does have some kind of mean streak towards him. So I think he definitely plays the right approach for a kind of a young kind of fresh beat cop joining into this kind of world of Hong Kong inspired kind of landscape, which I think is pretty cool. And I think the chemistry back and forth between Chow Yun-fat and Mark Wahlberg is pretty interesting. It definitely starts to kind of really pick up and get more intense as the film starts to kind of kick up its gear in terms of its story. And once they both realize they're both corrupted kind of cops working for the same people, that's when the film starts to really kind of get more interesting, and you start to get richer dialogue, more interesting kind of back and forth between the kind of the trust. Can they trust each other? And I think it has its moments for sure. It's not terrible. I definitely would recommend it as in terms of a watch for Chow Yun-fat, for sure, in terms of his American outing, but definitely not one I would revisit or explore again. And I definitely think there's a reason why this one is a kind of a forgotten kind of, a American style kind of Hong Kong movie that kind of is forgotten about, because it doesn't have nowhere near as much intrigue compared to some of those other big players. And obviously with some of the kind of star appeal within Jackie Chan, which later on, which is a bit of a shame. I think Chow Yun-fat definitely has all the the elements of a movie star, of course, within his own native kind of, territory within the kind of the hard-boiled and the killer, but unfortunately, in terms of his American outing, it's very few and far between. So what are your thoughts and opinions on The Corruptor? Do you think this is a highly underrated film? One of your favorites? Please comment down below. Do you think this is a definitely deserved kind of forgotten film that has some qualities here and there? Do you think this will get a brand new release down the line, potentially from 88, or maybe some of the other big players? Potentially Arrow could release it again within the UK, being the fact that this has a US only release, so who knows? Please comment down below. So in the meantime, guys, Amphlett Reviews, signing out.